Okay, some of the second years will have heard some of this. It's kind of circularity to this, because this time last year I was sat on, probably in this very room with a pile of interview transcripts trying to make sense of them. So it feels like there's a kind of circularity to it. And I'll explain the title in a minute. It's called Hill at Mile 25, Phenomenology of Self-Compassion and Social Work. So what I'm going to do is to talk about what I mean by self-compassion in this context and why I think it's important and potentially a problem as well. We'll talk about the relationship between self-compassion and self-care, because I don't think they're the same thing and they sometimes get confused. I'm going to give you a very brief overview of the literature, to talk a little bit about methodology, and some people in the room might actually be interested in methodology, because quite often the methodological discussions kind of go over things and then the implications for practice. When I'm talking about, I mean both direct practice, as in what social workers do, but also educational practice, what I do as an educator in my day job. Okay, so a lot of this will be familiar to the people certainly physically in the room. Really, it's the person who has done, along with some of the work that Paul Gilbert's done, probably the person that has driven quite a lot of the work around self-compassion is Christian Neff, the American academic, who's and also in conjunction with Chris Germer, and they've done a huge, a lot of work over the last 20 or so years, and they talk about the three elements of self-compassion. So the extending kindness and understanding to yourself rather than harsh self-criticism and judgment. This bit about seeing us as part of the larger human experience, the rather than being isolated, and the mindfulness component, which is holding those painful thoughts and feelings in a balanced awareness rather than over-identifying with them. So those are the three, pretty much taken, not quite for granted, but pretty much taken fairly uncritically now, in the context of the self-compassion literature.
And Martin, the screen on here isn't changing when you scroll through and change the screen on there.
I don't know. I don't know why that should be the case. I sometimes have this problem. If I
stick with it in that format.
If I stick with that in that format, okay. Yeah. Okay. Right. Sorry. Okay. So it's then seen as being a problem, right? It's seen as being a form of self-pity, a form of weakness. It encourages complacency. It's about narcissism. It's about me. It's about selfishness, right? And the Christian Neff, in quite a sustained critique of that, and it's one of the criticisms of compassionate leadership as well. It's seen as being a little bit on the soft side, and it's, if you're self-compassionate, then it's all of those things. Right. And I think that when you deconstruct that, and the Christian Neff in the 2015 work kind of engages with that in detail and says, actually, it's not about that at all. It's not about that. And good and self-compassion, if done properly, is about preventing some of the issues that are around. And that the literature would tend to say that it's unclear about whether self-compassion is necessary to be compassionate to others. So it relates to something that Lisa said earlier on. It's not clear. However, the literature so far would suggest that self-compassion helps people sustain the act of caring for others. Right? And the other problem with self-compassion is the risk of what's referred to as the risk of backdraft. But what that means is, you might have come across that idea with it's borrowed from firefighting, that if the fire is being suppressed and you open a door or a window, there's a danger that you reignite that. And for people who are not used to being self-compassionate, to even have a gentle invitation to self-compassion can actually be debilitating and can take them back. So there's a fair amount of research to indicate that this is an issue, right, in relation to that. And of course, did I not just find a paper just last week that indicated that this is so? But you always find a paper just after you've finished it. That's a rule, that you'll find your paper that's really important the week after you've submitted your dissertation. And this for me, flowed from the compassion module, and it flowed from an interest in compassion, particularly in social work. Stickle in the US, Tanner in the UK, differentiates that, and that differentiates between self-care is about implementing strategies to promote healthy functioning, whereas self-care is about treating yourself kindly. And the paradox of, I was talking to a group of students about this paradox of rushing to yoga, right? You know, so if yoga is a self-care strategy, but if it becomes something else on your to-do list that you have to do, then is that about self-kindness, right? And there's actually an American website supporting social work called Rushing to Yoga, funnily enough. Anyway, so the relation, so this bit about you can do self-care but without being self-compassionate. Okay. Now, when I got into the literature, right, it was really interesting, right? And the other bit about dissertations, you find you use the word interesting in lots of different contexts. Like when you say this is interesting, other people go, no, it isn't, right? But there's a limited literature. Most of the Anglophone literature is in the USA and Canada. In particular, with less in Australia and New Zealand. Most of it is quantitative. Most of it is using Christian F's self-compassion scale, right? And the UK research, such as it is largely correlative to self-compassion, correlate with this or that or the next thing. There was one study that I found that compared social work students with other professional groups, OT and nursing and counselling, and there was a suggestion that social work students were less self-compassionate, and this notion of the wounded healer. And that's possible because of the background of social workers. I only found one study, an American PhD, that covered some of the same ground, but Rickers was talking with experienced meditators. So of course, as a researcher, that's open field. You know, so that's really what the areas that I want to be looking at. And I found, so I then broadened out slightly, and Chen, one of the papers that I came across, looked at early career teachers. So very similar groups that use an IPA found that self-compassion correlates with resilience against stress. So basically, there was very little in the qualitative literature. So that was something that was really up for exploration. In terms of methodology, then my aim became an exploration of the phenomenon of self-compassion amongst social work students in education. That was my starting point. I was interested in finally in students towards the end of their social work education, how they were framed to go into the world. And I used phenomenology. So I was interested in the phenomenon of self-compassion, right? And I ended up, without boring you with the detail of the debate about which phenomenology I used, I ended up with an approach I hadn't come across previously by two Scandinavian academics called Dahlberg and Dahlberg. I think they might be related. And what they tried to do was a midway between the kind of descriptive phenomenology of Husserl and the interpretive phenomenology of Heidegger. I'll come back to that if you wish. But what I did was, and I don't even know where this came from actually, rather than just go straight into interviews, I added something called photo-elicitation, right, which is a fancy word for take some photographs and tell you what self-compassion means to you. But what that did was gave me a way into the interview, right? So that meant that, so rather than have a set series of questions, what I did was I used the prompts of the photo-elicitation to open up the discussion, and then just took that discussion wherever it went. And that was about listening. It's about being open to the prompts. So there was no interview schedule as such. There was just the kind of, what does self-compassion mean to you on the back of that. So the data wasn't there for me to collect. It was to gather in terms of the dialogue with participants. But it was about an attitude. Mark Vagel has written quite a lot on this, about this attitude. I was there to look at the phenomenon. And if anyone's dug into phenomenology at all, this notion of bracketing your own experience. But again, back to the Dahlbergs, this notion of bridling. So instead of putting it behind you, you were steering it. So essentially what I did was a series of 6 interviews that ended up being, which I'll explain in just a minute, 6 interviews with it ended up being 3 final year students and 3 newly qualified social workers. So I ended up and I approached it with a mindset that was as open as it was possible to be. I tried to put behind me my previous research experience. And there's a good fit. So it wasn't just, I didn't just pluck this out of the ether. Like, there was a really good fit between phenomenology approaches and photo-elicitation. So other people have done it in different contexts. So there was a good fit because it was opened up. And obviously what we've got here is now in not that long ago, if you're going to do photo voice or photo-elicitation, you'd have the faff of disposable cameras, getting photographs developed and all the rest of that. And of course, everybody carries a camera around with them now. So this makes it very easy. Right. And what you're seeing there is one of the images that one of my participants gave me. This is someone whose idea of self-compassion, I'm not making this up, his idea of self-compassion is to go for a 30-mile run. Right. Right. Now, yes, yeah, exactly. Right. You know, so the other picture, and I asked for 2 images, but the other image was very, very, very different. And so that, and it made perfect sense, right, as I will explain. So we don't talk about themes in phenomenology because it's the phenomena, the constituents, the components, if you like. Self-talk and acceptance, like, was incredibly important. Rituals, right, were important. The management of boundaries, I think, was probably the most important. Finding a place. And this last one, that was all of this was dynamic with a strong temporal element. What I mean by that is that they shift and develop, change over time, and they're very fragile. And this last one, it emerged from, I think it was really quite interesting because I'd done one of the I got into one of the boathouse and the shrine room for a period of silent meditation. I hadn't thought about it and came, and this aspect had emerged during whatever I was doing in that period of meditation, which I thought was quite interesting of itself. Give you some data extracts. And the way I presented them, I followed a colleague of mine that did this. Rather than just present them kind of line by line, I deliberately broke the bits, the data extracts up into stanzas so they looked more like poetry, and it worked very well. Right, so this is Tina's. They're all pseudonyms. Tina's vision board that she had, and she said, "Wrote on that I didn't." She was a mature student coming back after raising a family. I didn't come this far just to come this far, right? And that externalizing the self-talk. And the data extract that's not here, and I think I've got time to mention, it's one of the guys that I interviewed as a master's student, and he'd come to a master's degree having probably not done very well in his undergraduate degree. So he'd come to a master's degree at a good university, right, and started getting good results, right, and he started doing really well. So rather than think, God, I'm doing really well here, what his initial reaction was, they must have really low standards. Right? And he framed his achievement, his positive achievement, in a way that it wasn't him, his achievement, it's the fact that the university, it's a very good university, had low standards, which I thought was a real, and he could laugh about it now because he processed it, but it was that. So back to Cora, who's the runner that you've just met, right? When she was talking about acceptance, she says, I know that at mile 25, there's a big old hill. I know that, and then now I'm going to get up there, and I'm going to get up, and it's going to be difficult at the time, and then I'm going to wonder why I'm doing it, but then I'll get there, and it'll be over, be done. And so that this notion of acceptance, in the sense that we'll all be familiar with in terms of our mindfulness practice, I think came, although Cora didn't have mindfulness training in her background, there was something that was very strong for her about acceptance. Okay. Rituals, I think, were really important, and some of those were very small rituals, whether for For home, it was Cora's other image was of her reading with a cup of coffee. Right, Kirsty's coffee ritual at work. For Gordon, it was music in particular, right? And Kirsty, go for a walk from work to clear my head, right? And it was that, you know, she contrasted that with space in the office and said, spend a full 5 minutes in the kitchen. So really quite small rituals were very important for nurturing self-compassion. And when I went back to look at the literature from a discussion chapter, very little about rituals in the which is interesting given what we know about mindfulness. So that was really important. Boundaries, I think, were incredibly important particularly for students. This image that's kind of covered a bit as a line of traffic goes, I kid you not, I had a 15-minute conversation with the person I've called Lisa about traffic cones, right? But because the importance of her setting as a student was, she was in a cluster of students in an open plan office surrounded by a whole bunch of qualified staff, and she said it was like it was a cross between Big Brother and The Apprentice. Like she felt constantly under scrutiny, and she describes an incident where someone asked her to do something. She says, "No, I can't do that." And walking along the corridor, I felt bad that I did that, but then driving home thinking, "Thank God I did that." So the importance of the respecting of boundaries at the time, yeah, okay. And place was really important. Not, and it sometimes, as in Kirsty's instance here, it was far away, up north, right? And the attraction of that was no mobile coverage, pretty much as here really. But so the place could be home. It could be the front room in front of music, right? It could be open water swimming for someone. It could be whatever. But place, the power of place was very important. Place as refuge, I think, was really important. And the last bit is that it's incredibly fragile, right? And in particular boundaries, they're permeable, they're shifting, and very easily allowed to be punctured. So, you know, particularly for early career, not just social workers, but I think for any profession in the early career, like there's something about underscoring how just important it is to manage your boundaries. And unless you put those boundaries in, sometimes it's difficult. You can't come back from it easily. And I think again that added another dimension. So that bit about, you know, as an early career social worker, you want to feel responsible for everything that's going on in people's lives. And unless people draw boundaries, then there's a danger that become overwhelmed very, very quickly. So the shifting nature of the boundaries, I think, was really important. So getting towards a conclusion, really, I don't want to overclaim from some of this stuff because it's a small scale study, so I don't want to overclaim from it. But I want to suggest 4 things: is that self-compassion can and should be taught as an adjunct of self-care. And we're starting to do that in social work and indeed other professionals. It's partly about recognition and permission. So saying to people, this is okay for you to be able to, you know, to do this. This is, you know, you have permission to do that. And I think there's a very clear importance of helping students and early career social workers to manage boundaries. And Christian Neff's work, her most recent book, suggests that it's a very, in particular, this is an issue for women. Christian Neff would argue in her most recent book that this is a particular issue for women. And paper that I've just read from someone at the university that I know quite well has talked about the macho nature of children and family social work, which is ironic given it's a profession that's 85 or 90% women. So there's something going on here. And okay, what happened there? I don't know. Okay, moving swiftly on. And that's me. This is from Holy Isle last year, and for anyone should want it, the references are there. So Thank you for listening.